the first Fireside chat with Jerry Kaplan and Nicola Morini. Many of you know of Jerry Kaplan. He's known as an AI visionary and futurist. He has been teaching. He's known as an entrepreneur. Sort of in my generation, he's known best for being the CEO of Go Corporation. Go was really the company that much before the Apple Newton or iPhone, iPad, or Palm Pilot sort of came up with this concept of the tablet, and has really influenced sort of the industry after that. He was also the co-founder of a company called Technology, which was a company that went public several decades back in the AI and expert system area. And joining Jerry is going to be Nicola. Nicola is the head of the AI practice in Accenture and drives their technology strategy. And when Nicola walks up, you'll see that the other important aspect of Nicola was that he played professional basketball for the European leagues. Nicola and Jerry.
Good afternoon. Thank you. So I'm very excited to be on stage with you, Jerry.
Vice versa.
So you're a legend in the AI space. So I'm delighted to be here. So why don't we start straight into one of the things that my customers ask me all the time is that is AI real? Is it overhyped? Is it something are we heading into another winter or a fall or a spring or a summer? How would you characterize that?
Well, I think that the field is widely misunderstood. I think if the way that the public thinks about artificial intelligence is they believe that we're building ever more intelligent machines that are sort of climbing this ladder towards human intelligence, and that someday they may exceed human intelligence and take over the world, and oh my God, what are we going to do when there won't be any jobs because machines will do all of our jobs? Well, I'm here to tell you that the machines are coming, but not quite in that way. They're not coming to drink our wine and steal our spouses and pile the beachfront properties. That's not what's going to happen. A much more productive and appropriate way to think about artificial intelligence is not really about intelligence, but to think of it as a continuation of the long-standing efforts to automate tasks. It's really about automation. It's about taking machines and computers to perform tasks that previously required human effort or attention. And there's nothing really new about that. And every time we come up with new kinds of machines that have done something that previously required expertise, people have gone, oh my God, the machines are taking over. This goes all the way back to the jacquard looms that took over for weavers in the late 1700s. That was a highly skilled job, and they could do any pattern precisely. And it was the same kind of thing we're seeing today.
But how big it is, right? Do you think that it's really, some people are saying comparing to electricity. I was on a panel last week and said this is as big as electricity. Is that, what do you think is this hype helping or actually, damaging a little bit the opportunity?
Well, I think the hype is helping guys like you and me. We get to speak on panels. But overall, I think that when expectations are either skewed, which is the case here, or are overblown relative to what the actual practical results are going to be, that always can be a problem. So it's not that the field isn't going to be very important. This is a very valuable collection of technologies, as you know. Your clients are out implementing systems. It's going to automate all kinds of activities that previously couldn't be automated. And I usually liken it to, I don't use electricity because that's a little different, but it's not unreasonable to say its impact would be equivalent to the invention of the wheel. And that's odd because it sounds like, oh my God, what could possibly be that big? But think about what the wheel did. It basically revolutionized transportation. And AI is certainly going to do that, and a lot of other things as well. So I don't really see the problem is what will happen is this will become an accepted, valuable technology in the same way that personal computers were, or relational databases. They're used everywhere. I mean, they've had a tremendous impact on society. But people don't think about, oh my God, I'm using a relational database. You know, it will just be ways in which we'll improve our lives and make us wealthier as a society.
No, absolutely, I agree completely. And when people ask me, so how would you characterize AI? And I say, I usually use 3 adjectives, right? I use big, complex, and good. Right? Big is because I think we're seeing something at a scale that I've never seen before. I'm not talking about like the potential. I'm talking about the reality and the pragmatism of today, right? So in October, just, little anecdote, right? I, presented to our board what was our plan, right, for selling services around AI, and we actually achieved that in 3 weeks. But that's because there is so much of that. It's the easiest sale of my 20 years of career in Accenture, right? And the customers really understand, not the hype, they understand the reality of it, right? They're all, going after it. And the other one is complexity, because that's what I'm worried about. I'm worried that the expectation is so high, and then, the outcome at the beginning will be still, important, but it's going to be incremental, right? It's not going to be spectacular in terms of what we will be able to deliver with this technology in the short term. And so when people react to it and say, oh, but you didn't deliver like the robot that took care of everything that I had before, right? Then they still feel disappointed. And then the other one is that it's good, because despite all the very negative talks that we're hearing in the marketplace from everybody, right? These authorities in the technology marketplace, in the field in general, so far my experience is that we have generated more work than less, right? So what do you think? Is it going to stay like that, or you see that fading out, or really the people that are saying that it's the end of our the way we intend work, the way we even the structure of the economical system is set up is going to be so dramatically impacted that will lead to a lot of uncertainty and chaos and things like that.
Well, there's this idea that you hear a lot of conferences and read in the press that what are we going to do? The robot's going to take all our jobs. Well, that's incorrect for 2 reasons. The first is, you said you go out and sell people on doing projects on AI. You cannot be replaced by a robot. They're not going to be listening to some robot explaining why it's a good idea to hire the robot. So that is not going to occur. A great many jobs involve face-to-face communication, involve persuasion, involve the expression of human emotions like empathy. Nobody wants to go to a robotic undertaker who says, I am so sorry for your loss. That's not what this is about. So that is a whole swath of jobs that engineers tend not to think about when they think about labor. They're absolutely not automatable at all. But the second point is, if you look at this from the perspective of automation, the history of automation, what you see is that the automation always changes the nature of work. So people who say, well, in 30 years or 50 years, 50% of the jobs that people do will be done by machines. That can be true. But it doesn't mean that the people won't have work to do. Because while we automate those jobs, it makes society wealthier. That means there's more money to spend. That means there's more demand for people who build yachts and will want to go on vacation. And it generates a lot of economic activity that picks up the slack. That has always been the case. And this worry that this is it, where all the jobs are going away, has happened regularly throughout history. You can look at it for the last couple of centuries. There are just numerous examples where millions and millions of people are put out of work in jobs. People don't make hats anymore. People don't build furniture by hand. There used to be 1 million telephone operators in the United States when I was alive. I mean, this was when I was a kid. And now there's only a few tens of thousands. So a lot of these people are out of work in some sense. But the skills that you need to do your work change. And that's why it's relevant, I think, for this audience and for the kind of work that Accenture does. Because you need to figure out what are the new skills. How do you train your workforce? And what do you do with the people whose skills will become obsolete?
No, I can give you an example. Last year, we had a part of Accenture called Accenture Operations that does business process outsourcing. Right? would be, in theory, one of those areas that would be more susceptible to be completely automated, right? And people automated out of the jobs. But in reality, and this is, the difference between the hype and the concept and the reality of things, is that we were able last year to reconfigure 21,000 of these jobs, but the headcount overall increased, which is interesting, right? It's completely counterintuitive. So that's what I'm worried about, is that, we think we have like one big press, thing that says, company X tries to do AI and something really bad happens and then everybody will stop, or you think this is something that is already in motion at a level that, it's unstoppable, right? And so we shouldn't be worried about it, right? Because sometimes we try to, I've been in technology for a while, right? And we say, okay, it's the cloud, right? 6 years ago, but still, you think about the cloud, hasn't really, it's big, it's everywhere, everybody's talking about it, but we haven't seen a lot of, critical enterprise systems to be moved to the cloud yet, right? A lot of movement to the cloud, but on edge capabilities versus the pure core. It will happen, right? No question. But 5 years into it, we haven't really seen it. We think it's going to be like that, or is it going to be really unstoppable when it takes off?
Well, I think there are two different issues there. There's a wonderful, a very quotable guy, I think his name was Casey Stengel, who was the manager of the New York Yankees way back when I was a kid. And he used to say the most ridiculous things. He said, how's the season coming? He was asked at the press conference. And he said, it's slow but fast. Well, this is always the case with technology, right? It's like it's not happening as fast as we thought, then all of a sudden it's done. So, yeah, this is constantly going to be happening, but it won't seem that dramatic as it unfolds. But when you look back after 30 years, you may still be around, I'll probably not be around. After 30 years, you say, wow, everything's different. I remember when people used to drive cars. That'll be the kind of thing that we're going to see. So it will happen. It's inevitable. I agree with that.
But is it going to be more like big deal at some point? There is this discontinuity, right? Where you were doing things in a certain way and now you do it in a different way, or is it going to be more incremental?
My personal view is it's always going to be incremental.
I think I was having this conversation with this, last week at this panel, and the person that was moderating the panel asked, give me a prediction, right? And I said, prediction of what? And what is it going to be in 5 years? Something tangible that, and this was the AI conference called, so what is something, that you can say that in 5 years we're going to check on you, right, to see if you say something new. And I said, I think that there's not going to be an AI conference in 5 years. And everybody was laughing, so, basically thinking that I was trying to get him out of the job, but there will be the first casualty actually of the AI. But I think I agree. I think it's going to be actually much more uneventful than people say, right? And it's going to slow, like what happened with the phones, right? It wasn't like one day that everything switched into another world. It's just, besides the introduction of the iPhone, but it was more gradual on what you could do with these devices, right?
Yeah, the laws of gravity in the technology industry have not been repealed. Who's that? Homer Simpson said, gravity, it's not only a good idea, it's the law. And the fact is that the same way that technology is rolled out in the past is that those patterns are going to reoccur. Sometimes they're faster. The iPhone, I think, was very fast. There was some other product recently that everybody uses that was one of the fastest. I don't think it was the iPhone, it was something else like that. Oh yeah, that's true. It wasn't everybody used it. And there are others that take a very long time. Like the usual question I get, he got the different form, is like, when are we all going to have self-driving cars? Well, it's never going to happen, it's never going to happen. And one day, most people have one, But actually, it's a little different because people will not be buying, I don't believe people will be buying self-driving cars in 30 years. It'll be a different system.
No, it's still, I think it's part of it, actually, that one specifically. It's too complicated. There are things that will take a while before actually can be done. But the assistant driving, it's everywhere already, right? ABS is the assistant driving, right? It will be more in that direction, right? Helping people not falling asleep, etc. So that it's important. So you're also like very active, of course, you know, with the Stanford and everything, everywhere else, like with academia and education, etc. Right? I think that is the space that will be very much redesigned, has to be reconfigured. Just to give an example, for us, so for our clients, it's super important. Right? We have 600 opportunities in our environment with clients to do AI work as of right now. And we think that it's going to be, in 3 years, 20% of every technology related work will be, in some respect touching different kinds of AIs. Right? But one of the biggest challenges we have as a firm is that we need to apply those things to us as well. Right? So we're just not doing it for customers, we're doing it for our own selves. But the biggest challenge is that how do I take my workforce, right, and I reskill it around it. And the biggest challenge that we had is what you said earlier, fast and slow, which is we couldn't use the same training approach that we were using in the past. The same training approach is, you train people on a subject matter, you can deliver the classes in 6 months, and then it takes a year before you retool people, etc. And then, it doesn't work, right, because things are happening on a weekly basis. So one thing that we're working on is, learning how to learn as a skill versus the subject matter expertise. So what do you think is, because sometimes I feel that the people that are coming out from some of the students that we hire, they're not ready, right? And maybe they're studying the wrong thing.
Well, as a general statement, we've got a real problem with education, at least in the US. People are not studying the right things. The other thing is our whole concept of how we go about educating people for their vocation, for work, is to a large degree obsolete. Specifically, you go to school, you learn your profession, you get a law degree, and then you become a lawyer and you work as a lawyer for the rest of your life. Well, that one may hold up. But many other, particularly in engineering areas, what you learn in school is probably obsolete in 5 or 10 years. So we need a different model where you can learn new specific skills. You can take time off to do that. We have ways to finance that to make sure that your skills are relevant and valuable in the marketplace. Like, I've got a PhD in computer science. And I used to say that I think that should come with an expiration date of about 5 years. Because the stuff I studied, I don't even want to tell you guys what, like how to wire up, AND and OR gates, that's so old people don't know what they are anymore. Let's just say there are millions of them on the chip. And we used to worry about minimizing the number that we put into a circuit. These skills become obsolete quickly, and you need a different model. Accenture's right out in the forefront on this, of course, because you can't fail at this, and you need to train your people, and you can't just throw them out for 5 years and bring in a new crew. But for generally the way that education is performed, vocational training is done in the U.S., particularly the way in which it's financed, isn't really working for the marketplace. And a model much more like what goes on in Germany, I think, would be much better.
But as an insider, right, do you see people thinking about it or still, status quo?
No, nobody's thinking about it. Sure. They're like, hey, at Stanford, the new theirs, they'll always be in England. They just teach them. I mean, my kids, you have a kid in high school, I know that, 16. And my kids who got out of high school fairly recently, all of them, they studied the same basic curriculum that I did. And I graduated in 1969. That's how old I am. That's the same stuff. They've been teaching the same damn things for 100 years. Why are you teaching, you have an 18-year-old, they have to learn calculus. Well, you raise your hand if you've used calculus in the past 6 months. There's always an engineer back there. Oh yeah, building bridges and the most advanced math I need is how to calculate a tip on a bill over at the restaurant. Because I can't count that high, or I get charged at this restaurant. But the point is we're not teaching the right stuff because there's no connection between what we're teaching and the actual needs of the employers.
What do you think is going to be the crisis that will drive this rethinking? Or we're just going to be like that, where the business world is going in a direction and the academia is going in another direction. Because one of the things that I noticed, but I agree, is that what is different about AI compared to some other technology or sciences is that a lot of research happens in private companies versus in academia. I mean, what Google, Facebook, or these partners of ours are doing, it sometimes is ahead, right? Or using the same people, right? At the end of the day, right? But is it going to be like that, or is it going to be like a crisis, an event that will force people to rethink things in a different way?
Well, the real crisis, the big crisis, has to do with income inequality, and that's with the distribution of resources. And that, the sub-crisis, is the reason that, one of the reasons that's happening is people don't have a way to learn the right kinds of skills, keep their skills up to date. So you get people who are very highly compensated and people who are not compensated at all, or compensated very poorly. Now, interestingly enough, we went through a crisis like this once before here in the US, and that was when farm work started to become automated at a very high rate. The figures are astounding as to how that happened. And there was a decision made collectively in the United States in the late 1800s that all the laborers who previously worked on farms, or that were part of that culture, my dad was at the farm and I owned a farm, and they only needed a certain low level of education. It was decided that the way to address this problem was to require high school education for everybody in the United States. And that was only instituted in the late 1800s, which is kind of remarkable. And so we completely transformed the way in which we educated people so that they were learning to be able to do office work or other cognitive activities as opposed to just moving a plow down a field. And so we may need that kind of recognition that we have a crisis and change the way in which we're going about educating people here in the U.S. In order to address the economic distribution issue. But yeah, it has happened before, whether we have the political will to do something like that. It may require something worse than Trump to go make that happen.
Because it's a tough statement, right? Where you say to a parent, you know the $500,000 that you put in the education.
Yeah, I don't say.
I mean, it's completely useless, right? So that is what I'm worried about, like personally, right? Outside of personally, it's really amazing. Like you get like some of these kids that come up with amazing, grades from great schools, and basically had to start tabula rasa. They had to start again because they're a very big gap. So it's going to be an interesting problem. Another topic I want to ask you about, because there are more of these that we can count anymore, right? It's ethics of that, right? So there are so many different community consortiums, clubs, associations, and everybody's talking about it, which I think is a really important issue to talk about. But I think we're applying two different lenses, right? So we should have an ethics for humans as well, right? Because when we say it shouldn't be bias, AI, right? Or anything like that, automatically we assume that the humans are actually not biased, which is totally untrue. Or that the way we should be able to trace and understand the rationale for decisions should be evident for an AI. But so for the humans, it's not, right? Because we know, and I know because I'm working in a lot of times, that a lot of the big important business decisions are gut decisions, right? So we should be able to reverse engineer them too. So what do you think? Is it another overhyped thing and the problem is not really there, or am I oversimplifying this one?
Again, this is kind of the microcosm of what I talked about earlier. The way you hear about the ethics is, what are we going to do when machines take over and they don't care about us anymore? Is it ethical to build these machines? Because people have in their minds the image of the Terminator and all these things out in movies. That's not the problem we're going to have. So in that sense, I don't think there's a fundamental ethical thing about how we're going to teach the machines to be ethical. However, if you take a broader view, there are a lot of ethical effects of the kinds of technologies, and you have to get specific in different areas. So in the granting of credit for mortgages, if you're going to apply a machine learning system to do that, there's a set of rules that you have to abide by. It's very difficult to incorporate those rules in a meaningful way into the program. I've said before that I think that at Stanford we're going to probably have computational ethics sequence of courses. And it's not some kind of magic. It's just talking about what are ethical principles that one wants to put into devices that are interacting with people in day-to-day ways so that it can behave in ways that we find socially acceptable. You know, is it okay for your robot to go stand in line for you to buy tickets at the movies while you...
But how do you reconcile that with the differences in, for example, culture, right? Geographies, right? So is it ethics? Right? So that's what personally we're wrestling a little bit with that, and our conclusion to it has been more that it's more about the enterprise should have the tools and the governments to manage these type of issues, but not actually having the answer, right? So not necessarily because it varies so much, especially the global companies, right? Something that is acceptable, like in the US, it might not be acceptable in Europe, right, or in India or somewhere else.
Well, I think that these are two ends of the spectrum that are really quite different. Ethics is fundamentally the same everywhere. There's some basic fundamental principles about respect for life and allowing people certain kinds of freedom, et cetera, et cetera. But it shades down into what I might call a social convention and social acceptability, which we perceive to be ethical. Like, if your robot's going to take a seat on the bus and there's some person who's disabled and needs to sit down and can't, that seems unethical, but actually it's just a social convention. So I think you're right that the social convention is different. For example, if I'm in Saudi Arabia, I hope I have this right, it's inappropriate for me to shake hands with a woman. However, here it might be rude not to. So that clearly some of these things are local. But basic principles like don't run people over when you're in your self-driving car, that's going to be universal. There's nowhere where they say, that's fine, if you're in a hurry, it's okay to run people over. So I think that while these are on the spectrum, I think it's useful to think about the two endpoints of that spectrum as we proceed to consider the questions of how we can ethically make best use of these technologies.
Okay. So before we turn to maybe some questions from the audience, give me, because I actually like these panels and going and talking about AI, right? So I don't want to get into another AI winter, right? So what do you think are the two things that we need to get right to really take advantage of these technologies and and make them lead to the promise, right?
Well, I think that there are two things. One is to do what you and I are doing, which is try to give a reasoned and rational explanation of what these technologies really are. So we can get that message out that it's not about the HAL 9000 from 2001. It's something different. I think that's a very important part of it. The other is just the work that you're doing at Accenture, which is make it value, make it obvious, make it clear that this has value. There are a couple of other ways that created the AI winner is we had people, mostly academics, standing up and saying, in 5 years' time, you'll have a whole robot that will be doing all your laundry, and that was nonsense. And they didn't know, they didn't have the commercial experience that you have or that I have. That was ridiculous. And it wasn't going to happen. And there was nobody to contradict. So another thing that I do is I call BS on a lot of the nonsense that we read about in the press. Unfortunately,
I was at this conference a few months ago, and there is a very, very famous person, I'm not going to say the name, right? They said by 2029, computers will have exactly the same capabilities as the human brain. There was a guy in the audience who said, do we need to? Right, and it was a good question because basically said, do we need to means that we already have 7 billion brains, right? So we need another one, right? So is it, right? That's what I'm worried to, right?
Yeah.
That people go around and say these things, but there is a lot of value that even with the, I think, still not very sophisticated artificial intelligence technology that's out there, there's an amazing amount of value for the enterprise to do work now, right?
If that guy was right, what's the use of the machine?
It's
just as good as a person. I know how to make people. I've done it. If I can make a machine, it's different. The whole point of the technology is that it does things better, faster, cheaper, and more accurately than people do. Otherwise, we don't use it. You're not going to go around building something that's got a brain like a human. By the way, it's complete nonsense that we're going to be capable of doing. That's
But it's like, it's a big name.
I know, I'm constantly answering those questions, you know.
So before, we have a couple of minutes. Is there any question from the audience for George?
Yes, I would be interested in knowing, you know, you don't have to name the customer, but some of the customer use cases that you see that you've been implementing would be quite helpful to put it into the sharper relief.
Yeah. No, so absolutely. So I think there are two categories of opportunities that we're essentially implementing right now. One is to do with business process, efficiency, right? So how do you, and this is something that is actually relatively easy from a technology perspective, but it's an enormous applicability. So how do you use some of the AI techniques, right? The deep learning, machine learning to improve the way business, it's an optimization problems and automation, like Jerry was saying. And the other one is crazy right now, like it's about probably 40% of all the opportunities that we have are around the virtual agents, not the bots. Because the generic bots, I don't really get it. But there are lots of enterprises that are building systems to improve customer care. Not necessarily to take headcount out, but to improve the way they manage more consistently customer care. So it's about the value play, which is interesting, versus a pure headcount reduction play. So there is one company I'm working with, a technology company. They manage via humans today 10 million interactions per month. 10 million are across many different channels, right? Voice or text messages, web chats and stuff. So their goal is to reduce that to 30%, fully managed by human, and 70% the combination of human and machines at the same time. It's a big business case, but also better customer service. So that's a huge area right now.
Thank you. I think we're actually out of time.
Perfect.
The second, they give us the red card.
Thank you.